Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to Thursday night. Almost the right time, not too early, not too late. You've arrived at the correct moment to check back in with our stalwart campers, the Junior Tours ambulance crew, for Chapter 4 of No Coins, Please. And where we last left the fellas, right, they had made it to New Jersey, I think, a little late, and they had a sunburn, and I guess really not actually, it was a pretty quiet end of the chapter. Nothing super crazy happened with it. Okay, well, let's see about Chapter 4, A Day at the Races. Roll 3, Exposure 2, Rob following Artie around in Washington. Note Dennis at the souvenir shop. The ambulance made Washington just after noon and began to tour the city as per instructions. They drove around in the van, stopping at various monuments and historic sites. They took the White House tour and improvised their own tour of the Capitol Hill area, including a peek at the chambers of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Throughout all of this, Rob kept a sharp eye on Artie, who made absolutely no attempt to lag behind or run ahead, and who was looking around with great interest. Rob allowed himself a little cautious optimism. Perhaps Dennis was right, and the New York episode was one-of-a-kind thing. Still, one couldn't be too careful. Dennis, of course, reached his glory at the souvenir shops. The dome of the Capitol building gleamed from his head, and he was festooned with flags and bunting. Kevin was driving everyone crazy with his fine eye for photographic composition. It was nothing to him that the group had to stand around posing for half an hour at a time, waiting for the sun to come out from behind a cloud. Ultimately, Sam had to speed up this process with friendly threats of violence. Sheldon, of course, kept the conversation lively with endless tidbits of useless information, most of them about Pete O'Grodnick. Much to everyone's annoyance, however, Howie caught sight of a poster advertising the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian Institution and began to nag vigorously to be taken at once. An on-the-spot referendum was held, and ambulance group voted unanimously to visit the Smithsonian, to shut Howie up. When they finally pulled into the campsite at 7:30, they were all exhausted and glowing from the first day yet that had gone without mishap. Rob was almost happy, especially when he caught a sideways wink from Dennis as the ambulance pulled into the spot directly adjacent to the van marked Bluebirds. "We can't park here," announced Nick solemnly. Rob turned. "Why not?" "It's Space 14, Nick explained. "So?" "The unlucky number? If we park here, we'll have bad luck." Dennis chuckled. "You mean 13. The unlucky number is 13, and there is no 13 in this camp." Nick pointed to the space which held the Bluebirds van. "Well, that's 12, and we're in the space right next to it. People think they can avoid the unlucky number by leaving it out, but that just makes 14 the real unlucky number. We'd better not park here." "Now look, Nick," began Rob, who had caught sight of Vera in the van's side mirror. "This is all superstition. Once, when my dad went bowling, he got lane 14, and in the middle of the game, he dropped the ball on his big toe, and the swelling didn't go down for a year and a half. And once in Toronto, we had this hotel room on the 14th floor, and wouldn't you know it, the toilet backed up. And once, but Nick," Dennis reasoned, "we're all tired, and this is a good spot near the washrooms. We don't really have the strength to look for another one." "What about 15, Nick suggested. "Forget it," said Rob. "We're staying here." "Well, okay, Rob. But when terrible things start to happen, don't say I didn't warn you." Throwing his arms upward, Dennis yawned at the night sky. "Ah, Nevin, this is the way life was meant to be." Rob leaned back against the door of the van and rested his arm on the outside mirror. "It looks like things are taking a turn for the better," he admitted. Dennis sighed. A starry sky, Washington D.C, and most important, a rendezvous with two charming young bluebirds tomorrow night. What better has life to offer, Nevin? Good old lucky 14. We better hit the sack. We got a big day tomorrow, and an even bigger evening. By the way, asked Rob, where are we taking the ladies? Don't worry about that now. Women admire spontaneity. When the moment is upon us, we'll make our decision. The two entered the tent, undressed, and climbed into their bedrolls. Dennis was soon snoring lightly. Rob lay in a sleepy haze, his mind wandering over the events of the past day. In just 24 hours, his mood had changed from black misery to happiness, contentment, and anticipation. Then again, that was to be expected. He'd had a nice day in Washington, Artie hadn't disappeared, and best of all, he had a date with Cindy. Or Vera. Dennis, dumb old Dennis, had been right about this trip after all. Even the kids were beginning to grow on him. They were downright nice. Sam with his sublime self-confidence, Howie and his space obsession, Kevin and his camera, Nick and his silly superstition, Sheldon and his motorized mouth. Even Artie was a nice, quiet little guy. And to watch Dennis buy souvenirs, it was all going better. It was all going to be better from here on in. On that note, he drifted off to sleep. The next day was hot and sunny, and after breakfast, Dennis handed out pens and paper to his 6 charges. All right, guys, you've sent your folks a little postcard, but now it's time you wrote them a proper letter. Go to it. Sam moaned, "Aw, come on, I don't want to write a letter. I'll tell them about it when I get home." "Right," ordered Rob. The 6 boys deployed themselves about the area. Sheldon, Howie, and Kevin remained at the picnic table where the group had eaten breakfast. Nick and Sam lay on their stomachs on the grass, and Artie propped himself up against a shady tree and used his knee as a writing desk. With his briefcase out of sight on the other side of him, he looked the quintessential boy in his natural habitat. Cute, harmless, healthy, intent only on his letter. A picture straight out of a brochure of any summer camp. Even Rob had to smile. Then he was distracted by Howie's voice. "Hey, guys, we can write all about how the ambulance got towed away in New York." "Yeah," exclaimed Sam. "Hey, Dennis, how do you spell impounded?" "Oh, don't write that stuff," exclaimed Dennis. "Just write, having a wonderful time, love, whoever." "But you said you wanted a proper letter." "Well," Dennis explained, there are certain things that we share as a group that we really should keep to ourselves." "You mean like all that stuff about the police?" "Yeah." Rob laughed. "That was a close one, wasn't it?" Dennis smiled too. "Hurry up, everybody. Washington is waiting for us." "Hey, where's Artie?" All 7 pairs of eyes flew to the tree. There sat the pen and paper, and no Artie. Rob darted over and picked up the letter. It read, "Dear Mom and Dad." And there it ended. "He was in front of my eyes," cried Rob, looking around in all directions. "I swear, in front of my eyes." "All right," announced Dennis in what was becoming a regular speech. "Everybody stay calm. Don't panic." Rob's eyes darted about the camp. "He's disappeared." Letters forgotten, the 7 ran out to the highway and anxiously scanned the area in all directions. Sam frowned. "He's kind of a drag, isn't he? I mean, aren't we good enough for him?" "Why did he come on the tour in the first place?" said Howie in annoyance. Rob, who had been asking the same question concerning himself, slumped against the telephone pole. "Why me? Why?" Nick had to answer. "This is all because we parked in Space 14. I told you it was looking for trouble." Dennis breathed deeply. "Let's just finish the letters and get into town like we planned. Either we'll run into him or he'll find us like in New York." "As though things went so well in New York," said Rob sarcastically. "Cool it, Nevin. Things only go wrong when we lose our heads. Everything's going to be okay." On the stroke of 9, Artie Geller, clad in tuxedo and gloves, entered a smart hobby shop in the heart of Washington. He toured the store silently for a few minutes, then borrowed a pen and paper from the manager and began to make a list of his requirements. The manager's eyes opened wider. "That's going to run you into a few bucks, son." Are you sure you can afford it? Artie nodded confidently. He slid the paper across the glass counter until it came to rest in front of the man. I'll have this, please. How much? Shaking his head, the man rang up the figures on the cash register. With tax, $579.63. He laughed. I'll tell you what, kid. You've got $500. It's yours. Casually, Artie undid the third button of his ruffled shirt, reached into the leather pouch, and came out with a small gold key. He inserted into the lock of his attaché case. There was a soft click. He lifted the lid to reveal his cash resources. In neat stacks, held in place by metal money clips, lay the bills, arranged by denomination. He removed 5 crisp new hundreds and placed them on the counter. The manager made no move to take them. He stood stiff as a statue, staring at the attaché case as Artie closed and locked it, returned the gold key to its pouch, and redid the shirt button. Do we have a deal? Asked Artie softly. The man snapped out of his reverie. Huh? Yeah. Sure. He looked thoughtful as he rang up the sale. I'll need your help to get all the stuff together. Then maybe I'll close up today. And maybe tomorrow I'll fly to Florida. I feel old. In half an hour, Artie was moving through the bustle of Washington's morning traffic, towing a wagon laden with packages, boxes, and bags. The load teetered dangerously as he pulled it up Capitol Hill to a spot on the grassy parkland overlooked by the Capitol building. It was level and offered 2 major benefits. It was heavily traveled, and it was virtually out of sight of the security sentries because of the slope of the land. Setting to work, Artie removed the strings from his parcels and began to unpack. He opened the auto racing set first and began laying 8 lanes of track in different directions. Then he took out the electric train set and wove its track in and around the road racing complex. The sight of a boy in a tuxedo crawling on the grass and setting up toys attracted attention, and comments began circulating among passerby. In an amazingly short time, a staggering system of mechanical toys began to rise from the lawn. A crowd began to gather, and by the time Artie put the last tunnel in place, at least 50 people stood watching in fascination. The setup was like a miniature city, with systems of track towering in the air, then spiraling back down toward the ground, all supported by tiny metal girders. There were bridges and tunnels, treacherous curves and long straightaways. An elaborate canal system snaked through the complex, patrolled by a small fleet of boats. From the 8-car starting gate, tracks rose to great heights and plunged back to the ground, twisting in loop-the-loops, and stretching through giant moving barriers, railroad crossings, and jumps over the canal. The tracks crossed and recrossed each other, ultimately merging into one single lane before the finishing gate. Leading from the whole arrangement was an intricate system of wires attached to huge battery packs. Awestruck, the crowd stared at the wonder that lay glinting in the bright sunlight before them. "It's beautiful," declared one woman. "Son," said a man, "when I was your age, I had a pretty nice model train set. But now I'm not ashamed to admit that you just rewrote the book with this setup. Would you mind telling me, what all this is?" From a box, Artie carefully removed 8 cars, identical but for color, and placed them in the starting gate, which also served as the energy charger. "This is just a trial run, of course," he said to the crowd. "Which car do you think will win?" Immediately intrigued, the spectators stared even harder, attempting to untangle the spaghetti-like jumble of track that each car would travel. It was a hopeless task. "Let her rip, kid!" Artie energized the cars and released the starting gate. 8 streaks of color launched off in different directions. Blue and white shot forward, then diverged into a V. Red flew through a dazzling loop-de-loop. Green and yellow shot down steep hills and hurtled across the canal. Orange screamed around a sharp curve and shot through a tunnel. Black and purple took off, seemingly in the wrong direction, then zoomed through a number of maneuvers and hurtled for the finish line. There was a murmur of delight and scattered applause for the crowd as the 8 cars converged on the final single stretch. With 4 lanes left, blue pulled ahead of orange, green ahead of red, yellow ahead of purple, and black ahead of white. The next fork in the road left blue and green in the lead, barreling towards the single lane in victory. Green squeaked through the gate first, amid wild applause from the growing crowd. Artie arranged the 8 cars back in the starting gate and waited for the ovation to die down before making his pitch. Would anyone care to make this a little more interesting? I pay 3-1 for the winner. A roar of appreciation erupted from the crowd, and money began to appear in eager hands. Before I take your stakes, I feel it's only fair to tell you that under the actual race conditions, there are other factors involved than what you've just seen. Not all the cars finished the race, you see. We saw the game, kid, said a man Artie recognized as a senior United States Senator. Let's get on with it. Can you take a bet as large as $5 on that green car? Certainly, sir, said Artie. Just let me organize the table. On the empty wagon, he arranged 8 small trays, each one corresponding to the color of a car. He rolled the wagon closer to the crowd, looked up and smiled. No limits on betting. And no coins, please. Money appeared from everywhere. Heavy betting went on the green car, but a considerable sum went down on second-place blue, and the occasional bet went on the other 6 cars. When Artie withdrew the wagon, the biggest bet was the senator's $5 bill. We'll just take the kid for a few bucks and leave him alone, the senator chuckled to his aides. You know, just to teach him a lesson. Artie walked over to the power pack and flicked the switch. The miniature city came alive. 2 electric trains began moving along separate tracks, and boats began to sail the canal. The blades of 3 enormous windmill tunnels started rotating slowly, and at 4 points along the track, mechanical moose crossed back and forth. Most hazardous of all, 6 pile drivers, suspended by wires above the arrangement, worked relentlessly, pounding the track. The crowd stared dumbfounded. Artie energized the cars and released them again. The race began as before, except that this time the crowd, now almost 100 strong, was cheering wildly. The first disaster came when Yellow, fresh out of the starting gate, went into the jump for the canal and rammed head-on into the smokestack of a passing luxury liner. The car flew through the air and hit the grass, tires still spinning. The demonstration of sudden death heightened the spectators' excitement as they followed their own cars and cheered vigorously. A woman screamed as the blade of a windmill swept purple off the track. Orange disappeared from sight in a tunnel and came into view again only for a fraction of a second before being caught right over the front wheels by a pile drive. It flipped gracelessly through the air and came to rest in the coal car of one of the trains, which was itself continuing toward a railroad crossing. The red car was approaching the same crossing. Faster, Red! Faster, Red! Faster! A man covered his eyes as the train hit Red broadside, sending it careening off the roadway. The senator was jumping up and down, screaming himself hoarse. As he had logically reasoned, Green was the best car. It was hurtling along well ahead of the pack towards the single lane and an easy victory. That $15 was as good as his. Crash. Before the horrified eyes of most of the bettors, a moose stepped out onto the track and wiped out the much-favored Green. A great sigh arose. The smart money was still on blue, which was speeding towards the single track. The black car was also headed for the single track, but from the other side. All eyes were on that intersection as the 2 cars hit the merging point at the same moment, kissed briefly, and then flew off the track in opposite directions. The shocked spectators stared as White, the only car left, glided steadily to the finish line. "Oh yeah!" From the depths of the crowd danced a joyful congressman, punching the air and chanting, "White, White, White!" As he ran up to collect his payoff. $3. He nudged the senator. I was the only one with the faith to bet on White. What foresight. As the emotions slowly calmed, the spectators watched Artie Watch while Artie dumped the rest of the money, his winnings, into a large carton that had held the train sets, and he placed the cars once again. Dennis sorted through a stack of Bald Eagle t-shirts, selected one and held it to his body. How about this? Good? Or maybe too much red, white, and blue? Buy it, said Rob in agitation. You already own everything else. Oh, come on, Rob, loosen up. We're sightseeing. May I remind you, one of the sights we're supposed to see is Artie? He's not here, so let's move on. Amen to that, said Sam. You've seen one monument, you've seen them all. Hey, look at this, exclaimed Dennis. House of Representatives steak knives. Maybe a present for my folks. Dennis, why don't we hit the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum again, suggested Howie. Forget it, said everybody. I'm hungry, announced Sheldon, not for the first time. Maybe Artie's hungry too, and we'll catch him at the restaurant? Rob threw up his hands in surrender. Okay, it's almost lunchtime anyway. Let's eat. Roll 3, exposure 35. Dennis eating enchilada. Red is the winner, announced Artie over the tumultuous cheering of the crowd. The house is now paying off for red. I must have the worst luck in the world, complained the senator sullenly. Any car I bet on, bang, it hits a moose. Why always a moose? I'd almost welcome a train or a boat. Trying again, Senator? Inquired Artie as people crowded around the wagon to place their bets. Yeah, I'll put $10 on white. Who ever heard of a road race with a moose in it anyway? In that particular race, green was the winner, while the hapless white met with a moose fairly early on. In little more than an hour, interest in Artie's road racing casino had reached a dizzying peak. The crowd was never less than 200 strong, as departing spectators were replaced by fresh passersby with fresh money. Senators and congressmen, civil servants high and low, diplomats, foreign and domestic, and tourists from all over the world converged on one spot on Capitol Hill, some staying for minutes, some longer. Most left a little bit poorer, but all took with them the feeling that they had participated in something beautiful. But the real die-hard was the senator, still awaiting his first triumph of the day as Artie announced the final race. All right, kid, you've busted me. He turned his empty pockets inside out to illustrate the point. See, all I got left is $4, and I'm going to put it on the green car. Kid, if there's any justice, I need to win, because if I lose, I'm going to have to hit up my secretary for cab fare home. Artie smiled slightly and rolled out the betting table. Eager hands pushed money at it. The senator laid down his final stakes, and all the others, knowing him to be a notorious loser, cast their cash elsewhere. Bettors racked their brains for inspiration to make that last bet count. When Artie retrieved the betting wagon, the amount of money placed there easily tripled anything that had been wagered so far. The senator stood in front of the crowd, staring at the starting gate with intense concentration. The green car was in trouble immediately. A pile driver caught it on the rear bumper, holding it in place, front wheels in the air, back wheels spinning out the electric charge to no avail. The other 7 cars continued their mad pace along the track. A distinguished-looking businessman threw his custom-tailored jacket to the grass and began stomping on it in a fury of frustration as the yellow car struck a 3-masted schooner and bounced out of play. A Senate page swallowed his gum as white met its end on the turn of a windmill blade. 2 diplomats, who had heavy stakes on black, broke into excited Cantonese as their car headed for the finish line. In unison, both uttered an untranslatable monosyllable, as their hopes were pile-driven mere inches from the home stretch. Red, purple, blue, and orange were still in play. Everyone watched excitedly. It was going to be close. Green was still pinned down, wheels spinning. The 4 live cars shot through the hazards, missing them all, and rocketed toward the lane merge. It looked as though a crash was inevitable. Miraculously, the field survived and sped neck and neck to the next merge. By a hair, orange pulled in ahead of blue, and red led purple by a bumper. As the cars headed for the final merge and what looked like a photo finish, red and purple touched their wheels. That was all it took. For an instant, the cars were arranged in a tight rectangle. Then they were sailing through the air, north, south, east, and west. The crowd gasped. There would be no winner. But suddenly, the spinning wheels of the green car stopped, and the front end fell back to the roadway, jarring the car loose from the pile driver's clasp. Propelled almost entirely by the force of gravity, Green rolled slowly down the track. It moved through the windmill tunnel, across 2 sets of train tracks, and past another pile driver. Now the crowd had fallen dead silent, holding its breath. The senator was on his hands and knees by the track in a desperate bid to will the car over the finish line. A moose appeared, and Green moved into it with a gentle clink. When it withdrew, the car was still on the track, inching toward glory. "He did it!" gasped the senator. "He beat the moose! Come on, Green, come on, please!" Still moving at a snail's pace, Green entered the 4-lane merge, then the 2, and headed down the home stretch, urged on by the senator's demented yelling. It rolled down the road right up to the finish line and stopped, dead. The senator wailed in agony. All at once, the spectators broke into hysterical laughter. Artie looked at the betting wagon. The senator's last $4 stood alone on the green tray, dwarfed by the mounds of money piled on the others. Artie reached out his foot and nudged the green car over the line. The senator was almost in tears. Wow. Well, that was awesome. All right. I am going to pack it up for this week, and we will be back next week, same time, for Chapter 5, Cost Cutting. But in the meantime, getting to be about that time. So I'm going to go get me some sleep. Good night.